The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Comito and Steve Gravel. Presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mining.
Mike, they said it couldn't be done, but we're back. It's season 4 of The Unlikely Innovators. Myself again, as always, Steve Gravel, and joined by
Mike Comito.
There he is.
No, but like season 4, definitely not something I don't think we would have thought when we started this way back when as a pandemic project to try to reach people when we were shut in our dining rooms, basements, and wherever else we could find a quiet time for.
Indeed. Yeah, and I think in many ways this episode to kick off season 4 is a return to our roots.
Yes.
We initially started this as a means of telling people about previously undertold stories, and I think Pari Johnston definitely did that for us today.
Yeah, I think there may be some intentionality to how we select our guests, Steve. I don't know if you want to be on pulling the curtain back too much, but we do put thought into who we bring on and how we tell these stories. But yes, I agree with you, Steve. When we started the podcast early on, the first episode was, I think, about what is college applied research, and then we went on a journey about like what is attack, how does funding work, all this great stuff, right? So I think for us to start season 4 with Pari Johnston, President and CEO of Colleges and Institutes Canada. You may know them as CICan. So to have Pari come on, she's now coming up on her first year at the helm. So certainly she's been able to experience a lot in that first year. She talked about obviously her whirlwind tour of touring campuses, but certainly within that year, 6 weeks after taking the helm, the IRCC changes happened. So she's been navigating that while also continuing to tell these important stories about the role and impact colleges play, not only in graduating that next workforce, but R&D. So certainly we appreciate all the work that she does for that, because we certainly need that strong voice to talk about that on the Hill. So maybe what I'll do is I'll read Pari's bio, and then we'll probably just go right into the conversation that we had with her. So Pari Johnston is the 8th president and CEO of Colleges and Institutes Canada, a dynamic senior executive with 25 years of experience driving the transformative impact of Canada's skills, research, and innovation ecosystem for the benefit of Canadians. She is a recognized national post-secondary leader who builds strong and healthy organizational cultures while delivering results. At CICan, Pari is leading the National Association in advocating, building capacity, and driving knowledge to strengthen Canada's publicly supported colleges, institutes, cegeps, and polytechnics. Her strategic vision positions the sector to contribute to Canada's long-term agenda and ensures colleges and institutes are recognized as key partners in meeting our country's biggest public policy challenges. Steve, what do you think before we throw it to Pari?
Well, I think, the story that she'd like to tell about CICan is probably best told by her. So let's now go to Pari Johnston.
There we go. So we're back for season 4 of The Unlikely Innovators, if you can believe that. And we're so excited to be joined by Pari Johnston, who's the president and CEO of Colleges and Institutes Canada. Pari, welcome to The Unlikely Innovators.
Thanks, Mike. I'm really pleased to be here.
We're really excited to have you here. And as the name of the show suggests, we always like to talk about some of the unlikely journeys that our guests have had. I think it's always great for us to kind of ground the conversation by getting a sense as to where the guests came from and how they've arrived at their current journey, which we're going to talk about today. And Steve and I love this question because we've talked about on the podcast before, since we're both humanities grads, and how we've ended up in basically a tech and innovation space. So we're going to claim you as one of our own as well in this group. And I wanted to ask you about how your thoughts on going from studying French literature to now representing Canada's college system. And did you ever think that there would be a connection there from your studies early on to where your career and your journey has taken you up until now?
That's such a great question. And I love being part of this mighty club of humanities grads who go on to do amazing and big things. So wonderful to know that you and Steve are in that club too. Yeah, it's a really important question. And, it's not as unusual as one might think, because at the end of the day, I really feel that the training I had and the opportunity I had to study French literature at the University of Regina, which again might seem like an unlikely place to study it, but in fact, there's a very strong Francescois community in Saskatchewan where I grew up, was transformational to my life, really, for three reasons. One is that I took advantage of a study abroad opportunity in my third year of studies in French literature to spend a year in France studying and teaching. And that experience for a prairie girl was amazing in terms of opening up my horizons to a bigger world, to understand the importance of cross-cultural competencies, problem solving, living a little bit out of your comfort zone and learning how to problem solve. And it really solidified me as one of the sort of poster children for bilingualism in Canada, because it was essential to ensuring that I am very bilingual in French and in English. But more importantly, studying French literature taught me about context, good writing, and storytelling. And I see myself as this chief storyteller now for Canada's colleges and institutes. We have an amazing story to tell. And what I have been focused on is trying to project a narrative to Canadians, to Canadian decision makers, about why it matters to invest in Canada's colleges and institutes right now, because it benefits Canadians. So the ability to have worked and studied in learning about the power of a strong narrative and story has really helped me become a good communicator, and helped me understand about the importance of listening to other people's stories and finding the connections between what I'm talking about and what they care about. And I think that's really the power of humanities, is being able to be somebody who can be a translator, if you will, of different human experiences, but find the shared common ground. So it was a wonderful background. I then bridged to, once I finished up those undergraduate studies, to come to Ottawa to pursue my graduate work at Carleton in international affairs at the School of International Affairs, the Norman Patterson School. And that was a nice rounding out of my exposure to the big global geopolitical issues of the time. Again, just becoming a really strong writer, but really built my network, Mike, which has been a group of people that I studied with at the time that are now doing really interesting things here in Ottawa and around the world. And it's certainly, I think, helping me be a champion for Canada's colleges.
I love. Go ahead, Steve.
What a great billboard for humanities. I'm always fascinated by a new way of telling people why humanities is a good choice if you're not going to be a teacher or eventually be a professor. So, I mean, I'm really pleased to hear how that unfolded for you, Pari. Before you got to your current role at CICan, from your bio, we noticed you were at Genome Canada and then, of course, Universities Canada for nearly 2 decades. Can you talk sort of about some of the biggest differences you noticed sort of advocating for universities and now advocating for colleges? Because if the job of a role like yours is to tell stories, the story might be slightly different in those two cases. And as a result, you might have had to change with that story, or how you would tell that story between those two sort of groups.
Yeah. No, thanks, Steve. Great question. And, I really see the opportunity I have now at Colleges and Institutes Canada as a wonderful platform to tell what I have felt is an undertold story. As you pointed out, I had an opportunity for 20 years, over 20 years of really interesting, motivating, fascinating work, working to support the Canadian university sector at Universities Canada. I started out there as a program officer and an intern, and left as the VP Policy and Public Affairs. And the thread throughout was trying to always connect what the universities were doing in their teaching, research, and community service efforts to the impacts on Canadians' daily lives. And now that I'm working and have the privilege of serving as the leader at Colleges and Institutes Canada, I am really finding how natural that story of impact is, supporting and serving the college community. The community roots that our members have from coast to coast to coast, rural, remote, larger urban centers, is really quite special. And I think that the ethos of collaboration and the ethos of no door is a wrong door for a student to come in is something that is a differentiator from the sector that I worked in before, but also an important value proposition, I think, that we have to do even better job of telling Canadians and Canadian decision makers about. I like to say that the time for colleges and institutes is now. If you think about the big challenges Canada is facing, Steve, when we look at the housing crisis, we look at the healthcare system and the issues of climate change and of the need to provide more supports for an aging population in the care economy. These are all solutions that colleges bring. Mm-hmm. And Cambrian's absolutely front and center in a lot of that, particularly in the place where you sit in terms of supporting, an economic diversification and resource transitions and the ability for colleges to respond and be responsive to the problems that communities and businesses bring and cities and towns bring is a bit of a different orientation than the universities in general. I really want to stress that I come at this from an ecosystem perspective. I find it a little bit stale to talk about either or, and us versus them. It's really about an ecosystem, and many universities are working really hard to respond to their communities. But the colleges were built from that, right? Like the sector's entire orientation is to be in service of the workforce needs, the community needs, and so that lends itself to a really open ethos to collaboration with each other, with other partners, less need for territoriality or going it alone, if you will. And so those are some of the differences that I've noticed that I'm really trying to capitalize on as I talk to folks here in Ottawa about why it's so important to invest in the capacities that the college sector has to respond to Canada's big challenges.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's when you talk about responding to the community needs, I think it's funny because obviously applied research, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but for colleges, that's kind of newish, I guess, in the last, 15, 20 years or so. But I think maybe that activity had been formalized at that point, but we'd always been trying to meet community needs throughout the time that we had our doors open, right? So we were always doing these types of projects. Maybe they're kind of leaving through the side shop door, but now they're kind of formalized through our research offices, which is great. But I think that part about always trying to serve community, I think, is at front and center for all of the work that we do, from academic delivery to applied research to our development groups and all that. So that's great. But one of the things, having you on right now, it's obviously start of new term for colleges across Canada for the most part. And you're about to come up on a pretty big milestone for yourself. It'll be a year that you've been at CICan coming up soon in the next few months. And so I happened to catch your remarks when I was at the conference in Calgary in May, but we were just wondering if maybe you could share what are some of the takeaways you've had, over the past almost year. I know that there's obviously been some different things that have impacted the sector throughout that year. So it's certainly been an exciting and challenging year for you at times, I'm sure. But if there was a one or two takeaways from your first year at the helm, so to speak, what do you think it would be?
Well, it's been an incredible first year, and I have to say that leading CICan at this time is the privilege of my life. I really feel it's an honor to serve this community at this time. And like you noted, I've really put a premium on getting out and getting on campuses early and often across the country to help me understand how the teaching, the training, the research, the community engagement is happening on the ground. And so I've had the opportunity to be already in over 7 provinces and over 35 campuses, as well as a number of meetings of groups of institutions. And I'd say that there's a couple of things that have really stood out for me, Mike. And you noted one of the big disruptors in the system, which I'm going to tie in, and that's the federal cap on international students, which was announced 6 weeks after I'd started, and was certainly the biggest sort of disruption in our sector in decades when it comes to international students and immigration. But what I wanted to say that I've noticed on the ground is the absolute dynamism. First of all, like I'll be honest, I had not had the opportunity to set foot in a lot of college campuses in earlier roles. It was something that we were working on at Genome Canada, but so this was I was coming in with very fresh eyes. And I have to say that the dynamism and the can-do attitude and the real attention to deep industry and community partnerships was, and it shouldn't have been, but it was a real revelation for me. I was constantly in any of the campus visits I've done, being exposed to the depth of what partnerships bring in terms of the kinds of programs that were being offered, the kinds of projects that were being initiated, the way the campuses are really embedded in their communities, large and small. So just the ability to be dynamic, to be responsive and pivot to respond to the needs of Canadians was much more even than I had realized. The second thing was the real attention, the absolute fundamental attention to students. I was really impressed because my hosts were often the college presidents and or vice presidents teams, the teams. Mm-hmm. And to a person, when we walked around those campuses, they knew their student body. They were very present, very visible. They were entirely attuned to a student-centered experience. And I think that is so important when we think about, at the end of the day, why we do what we do. And that's to train and help young Canadians learn, in hands-on, applied, technical, different kinds of ways of learning to be able to apply their skills quickly and effectively in the Canadian workforce. And I was so impressed with the students I met. They were from all places, all over, all age ranges. It was just the diversity of the student body. Mm-hmm. And then the attention of the senior teams to those students, very mission oriented to students, really stood out for me. And this is why the challenge around the international student cap is been sort of the third driver that has really been a thread. It's played out differently across the country. And I know particularly for Ontario institutions like Cambrian, it's been hard because that mix of international and Canadian students is so important, particularly for remote communities where we're seeing a real trend in provinces which have been underfunding publicly funded colleges. The ability to continue to serve and recruit international students to support and help support the offerings we have for Canadian students has really been hit hard. And so, when I talk to our college leaders about the impact and the implications of the cap, and we all care about a program integrity, and we all want to make sure that every student we bring has a great experience. But the challenge of some of the rushed implementation of the policies and the cumulative effect of uncertainty has meant that the ability to serve students, both Canadian and international, particularly those in remote communities, which also really are serving Indigenous students and other underrepresented students, is really fragile right now. And I know that really preoccupies our college leaders. The final thing I'll say is I have really been struck by the appetite for more opportunities within CICan to bring college leaders together to talk about big issues. That wherever they sit across the country, they want to have a place, and I want to make that for sure CICan, to come together and talk about the big institutional issues that are coming down the pipe or that are facing them now. What are those headwinds that are facing college leaders? These are complex jobs. And how can we at CICan even up our game when it comes to leadership development for college leaders in the next 5 to 10 years is really a big takeaway and a goal for me.
You have a very organized mind, Pari. I appreciate the format that you speak in. I wanted, in a similar vein, because I'm sort of struck by the number of colleges that you physically get out to, and we're able to do that in a post-pandemic world, and it's really good to see, because I think you learn a lot by seeing when you actually go to these places. And I'm sort of reminded of whenever we have dignitaries around, or whenever I see tours of dignitaries, a lot of the times there's activities that you're asked to participate in, or things that you'd like to see. So Mike and I are both sports fans. It would be really interesting to understand from you like a highlight reel of things that may have surprised you about various institutions that you've visited over the last year or so. If you could give us a couple chestnuts from that time.
Sure. Well, and this is going to sound a bit funny, but one of the highlights for me is the fact that I have been treated absolutely royally when I go on campuses by the culinary programs. I mean, this is not something that I had the opportunity to experience at the same way when I worked in the university system. You know, we when I've had my campus visits over the last 9 months, you know, the opportunity to experience the culinary programs and the skill of our students in across the country has just been like literally a real treat. So that's one that stands out for me, as I have never eaten so well in my entire life as these chances to go on campuses and really experience the culinary programs and the skills of our students. The second that has really been interesting to me is the pride that our institutions have in their students who, you know, I'll admit, and this is, you know, unfortunate, I didn't know about it before, but the whole Skills Canada that just met, and there's big competition in France last week, seeing on campuses the banners and the pride and the students that have come up through the provincial competitions and then the national competition, international competition. This was new to me. This was a highlight reel. I thought, wow, like the Olympics of skills, you know, is so cool. And so that was really a highlight reel. The third is just the ability to be really hands-on. Many of our campus visits have delighted in putting me in different simulators. So I have driven, you know, virtual trucks. I have tried to weld something using virtual welding, none of which I'm good at. I don't have the hand-eye coordination. Given virtual needles in a dental technician program. So just because I am a hands-on learner, but I'm just not super coordinated. But just all of the opportunities to be exposed to the cutting-edge training facilities that many of our members have, and using different kinds of simulations for healthcare, dental care, you name it, has been another highlight, I would say.
If you ever need someone to carry your bags on those culinary tours,
I know who to call.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, what Steve isn't saying is that's good recon for us for when you come to Cambrian. Now we know what to kind of center our tour around to make sure that if you're making a stop in applied research, we will make sure that we try to incorporate some of those elements for you. But speaking of applied research, obviously Steve and I, you know, that's the area that we work in. Steve manages the Center for Smart Mining, and I oversee, you know, the college's broader research group. And, you know, Steve and I think obviously we understand the importance and the impact that college applied research has on the partners we work with and on the students that we see on a day-to-day. And we obviously know that you understand that as well. In terms of that narrative you mentioned earlier, how do you try to package and, I guess, market and tell the stories about applied research when you're talking to folks in government, or when you're talking to industry partners that are supporting colleges across Canada?
Yeah, no, I so support the kinds of work the two of you are doing, the kinds of work that Cambrian is really leading. And you mentioned it yourself earlier, we now have about 2 decades of investment in the maturity and breadth and impact of the college applied research ecosystem. And it's been an absolute revelation to me when I joined 9 months ago, and we had our Applied National Research Symposium in Ottawa in February. And when I got to really experience those that were our partners, many industry partners came, many community partners came, it helped me understand a couple of things. One is that we are now at the point that we need to reimagine how we talk about and how we invest in research in this country. I am absolutely convinced that the opportunity to leverage what the college applied research system can bring, which is partnered problem solving and collaborative research, is going to be key if we want to have more downstream impact of our research dollars in a constrained financial environment where decision makers are looking for value for money. I am a huge supporter of the need for continued investment in fundamental research. As you noted, I worked at Genome Canada for 4 years. Mm-hmm. The investments in fundamental in the genomic space that we have had in this country led to making sure that we responded to the pandemic in a really, really rapid way. But that said, we have a challenge in Canada, and you know it better than me, of business innovation. We underinvest in the Canadian business sector in training, in equipment, in R&D internally. We've lost some of our big companies, and our SMEs are needing partners like what the colleges can do to de-risk technology design, development, adoption, and integration. And that's what's going to drive productivity and competitiveness over the longer term, because we're primarily a country of SMEs, right? Mm-hmm. So that's your guys' sweet spot. This is what we do very well, is that our research portfolio at the college system, and we survey our members every 2 years to really take a look at that, has, our main partners are Canadian SMEs. Almost 70% of the research projects led by Canadian colleges are with small and medium-sized enterprises. And they're typically completed in less than a year. So we work at the speed of business. Mm-hmm. And they get to keep the IP. So we're retaining Canadian value creation in Canada. But what we need to do more of is reimagine some of the research programs in this country that have been traditionally university defined, where colleges are maybe a junior partner if they're eligible at all, or we have a small, very valuable program through NSERC. So the argument that I've been trying to make is that if we're looking to address more big challenges in Canada, we have to have colleges written in right at the front of any program design. We need to relook at the overall investments, which right now colleges receive 3% of the Canadian research investments federally versus 97% to the university system. And how can we reimagine the role of colleges in Canada's research enterprise if we want to drive greater impact? So those are some of the things that I've been talking about with parliamentarians, with research funders. And I think that there's an interest to look afresh, particularly given the imperative to modernize our research ecosystem. There's with the Bouchard report and others, we're really seizing that opportunity to help create a new narrative for the impact of and the value proposition of college research.
Well, let me tell you this: you definitely got the speech down, because that all I can say is here on all of that. What I hadn't considered was applied research as a remedy for the productivity crisis, and I think that's something that I think actually has currency if I were to spend more than 30 seconds thinking about it. But I think that's something that I'll be definitely looking into, because I think that's a really, really important idea that I hadn't considered before. So thank you for inspiring me. You had mentioned, and thank you for the sort of detail you were willing to go into around IRCC and really the sympathetic ear that you displayed on that, because I think it is important, and it's something that we're all definitely top of mind, or at least not top of mind, one or two in the things we worry about. But what I want to do is give you a crystal ball for a second, and we'll stray from IRCC what are you looking forward to in the years ahead for the Canadian college system? In whatever reality you'd like to paint, because this is your crystal ball.